G2 owns FAZE ? The front.
Yeah, I saw.
I figure we could lump in the FAZE matches together because they played the first and last match.
Yeah, sure, it's fine.
Because I just don't know how much we actually have to say about the Vancouver one. It's like, yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
they beat a team they should beat.
Yeah. Does my camera look okay for you on stream?
Let me pull it up.
Because we both look blurry for me, but I can't tell if it's like my internet or... where my phone is.
Yeah, that's fine.
Alright, as long as it looks good. Yeah, it looks fine on my phone. I don't know what's going on with my computer. Alright, I think we sound fine on Twitch too, but let me open YouTube. Testing 1 2 3 1 2 3.
Testing 1 2 3 1 2 3.
Good on Twitch. Good on YouTube.
All right, you ready to get started?
Yes, sir.
Hello and welcome to episode 215 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we are talking about week 2 of the Major 2 qualifiers. We also have quite a bit to talk about because Twitter was kind of popping this week, courtesy of, now that I just figured out how to say his name, Daniel Tsay, which we'll get into that. And I think we might have some other stuff to talk about as well. Before we get into any of that, how you doing, Bink?
Yeah, doing all right. First and foremost, for anybody else on the East Coast, hope you're staying safe and bracing for the bomb cyclone, which the first time I ever heard that term used for a winter storm. But, you know, you learn something new every day. Hopefully it's not too bad and we get through this show, but if I randomly drop out, or for anybody listening in the live version, I magically disappear, most likely lost power, but we're gonna try and get this done before we have any issues. So I'm ready to jump right in and talk some COD.
Yeah, we're gonna try to move this along relatively quickly because I would like to get a complete show in before Bink is covered in 7 feet of snow. But I think we have to start on Twitter because that's where things were kind of happening before the matches. And so you mentioned, because we have been saying Daniel Tsay for maybe 3 or 4 years now, whenever he entered in the competitive scene. But apparently that's actually not how you say his last name. It is Daniel Tsay is how he told Jersey Jerry, one of the Bush owners. That's how he says his name, which is just complete news to me. But the reason we're bringing him up is because he posted on Twitter in response to this breaking point graphic that showed that in the time before the CDL, the finals were won by the losers bracket team about a quarter of the time, 23.3%. And in the CDL, so 2020 to now, that number has increased to 41.4%. So basically 4 out of 10 majors are won by the losers bracket team rather than the winners bracket team. And that started just in the breaking point comments. It started a conversation about whether the team in the winners bracket should have an advantage going into the grand finals. We've talked about this specific topic before. I don't know if we've ever really come to a good conclusion, like in a definitive one, because I do understand the pushback by a lot of people about, having two best of fives, which was pretty much the norm for many years. But Daniel actually weighed in on Twitter, and he quote tweeted that graphic, and he said, "Good conversation on finals format. This is essentially showing the impact of the bracket reset. While we all agree the winner's bracket team deserves an advantage, our position has been that having two lives in the finals is too big of an edge, and this data seems to reinforce that. Winners bracket teams winning 80% of the time entering the finals can dampen the excitement. One, the outcome seems predetermined, and two, during the match, it's not as intense since it's not do or die for the winners bracket team during a large portion of the match. Now, should there be a bigger advantage for winners bracket? Potentially, for example, one map win, but we don't think a bracket reset is the answer. Winning 4 times as much versus the second best team, no less, seems imbalanced, and I'd argue that the now 60-40 split between winner of winners bracket and losers bracket is much healthier." I just said a lot of words. It comes down to the fact that they don't want to make it anticlimactic at the end of their tournament when, basically there's I'd say 3 out of 4 chance that you get the winners bracket team to win the major. And they feel like the losers bracket team is put at a greater disadvantage. I can see their point. I certainly can. I would also say that they put themselves at the disadvantage and that they deserve a disadvantage going in, considering the winners bracket team is undefeated going into that grand finals, and losing everybody else gets to lose one series, but the winners bracket team doesn't, is always going to be an unfair way of putting it. I guess the counterpoint to that would be that they played fewer matches, so they didn't have the ability to lose as many matches as some other teams. I guess it'd be like rest, and you don't have to be as stressed out about going through the losers bracket. But we've seen the opposite of that be true, that it's actually better for that team that's warmed up and they got to play a lot of matches that weekend. So I want to get you your thoughts and your opinion on this, because I think it's an interesting conversation, and I appreciate him talking about it on Twitter rather than kind of letting us guess how he feels about this.
That's where I was gonna start. This is the we have speculated on this, and we've heard many rumblings over the years as to why uh, the finals format has become what has become, like, gradually over these years. And I don't think it was ever actually publicly addressed by anyone like Daniel did today, or in this post we're talking about today. Um, so, first and foremost, I'm glad this is being addressed in a public light. This is something we've talked about in general terms with the CDL, is more communication. Like, a simple post like this gets you know, gets the people going, get some discussion going around, and it does at the end of the day give a good insight into how the league is thinking and operating. Now, whether you agree or disagree with that is an entire point, entirely separate in that regard. But at least in terms of getting that feedback and knowing what the league is thinking, I think that's pretty valuable. Um, I would just say that it seems like a lot of people in the comments and in the community are of the mind that the best, like, middle ground right now would seem to be a best of 9 grand finals where the winners bracket team enters up 1-0. Um, I personally don't know how I feel about that. I think you and I, and this is probably showing our age, or at least our our age in COD esports a little bit. But I know you've said it multiple times, and I've agreed with you multiple times when you said it. I'm a big fan of the continuation series, and
Mm-hmm.
the best of 11 that was used back in Black Ops 1 and in Black Ops 2 as well, I believe. Yeah, because the champs finals for Black Ops 2 was a continuation. So if you played the team previously, that score would just carry over. And if it's, OpTic versus FAZE in the winners finals, OpTic wins 3-1, then FAZE goes back to the grand finals. It becomes a best of 11 with OpTic up 3-1. And it basically just continues from where they left
Mm-hmm.
off. I think that would be, you know, at least something I would like to say. And now this is the part that wasn't addressed in this tweet, and what um has also been speculated over the years, is the notion that the CDL believes that bracket reset or a continuation series like that is too complicated for general, more casual fans to follow. We've had this conversation before about, end of the day, you and me don't care as much about the casual fans who, aren't tuned in all the time.
Mm-hmm.
The counterpoint to that is Activision and the CDL does care about trying to get those casual fans to become regular fans and more hardcore fans, so they're growing their product. So I get there's a lot of back and forth in this. I do think, I think Ake said a pretty solid reply here, saying we're artificially inflating a losers bracket team's chance for the sole reason of creating more excitement, and that was I think that was maybe a uh, if Daniel could go back, he might have changed his wording there where he says in his tweet, winners bracket teams winning 80% of the time entering the finals can dampen the excitement. And people are going to cherry pick that and talk about him like being more focused about the excitement of the finals. Again, counterpoint would be it's his job to try and
Mm-hmm.
have the most exciting product as possible. But in terms of producing the best competitive environment for these finals, the advantage or lack thereof for the winners bracket teams has definitely been well documented since the CDL, since the transition from the CWL to the CDL. I think Karma had a pretty funny quote tweet when he just simply quoted Daniel's tweet. He goes, "Nah, we were just running shit." Obviously talking about the OpTic Dynasty team, which I think that's a fair point too. But I mean, even he had a losers bracket run there, like when we talk about the E United versus OpTic matchup back in IW, where OpTic like almost got top 16 against Panda or whatever it does. We always talk about that match. Um, so even though Karma's saying he was running shit, he was on the other end of that in a loser bracket scenario where they didn't end up winning. But um, yeah, I think it's at least in my eyes, I don't think there's going to be any groundbreaking change implemented this season due to this tweet and the conversation surrounding it. But I'm happy this conversation happened, and I'm hopeful that this is a sign that the league is truly keeping an eye on these sort of things and potentially looking at future changes that could benefit everybody. But most importantly, end of the day, I do think the winners bracket uh, team in the finals should have some form of an advantage beyond just the map vetoes, which we've talked about multiple times now. The current map pool in the state it's in with the limited number of maps, like it is an advantage because of that, but it's also not a groundbreaking advantage, especially once we get to the end of the season and teams have played these maps that are in the final pool hundreds of thousands of times.
I think it's interesting that in his tweet he says, now should there be a bigger advantage for winners bracket? And I think a lot of people would argue like they have no advantage, like there is no bigger advantage, that like that would indicate that they already have one, and that isn't the case. Obviously we know like the real advantages of what they're talking about is that they don't have to play in the losers bracket, that they don't have to fight their way into the winners bracket the same way that the team from the losers bracket does. I would say that's not really an advantage. That's just a disadvantage for the other team. People might quibble about that, like the wording or the semantics of it. But I do think it's interesting that the CDL already kind of views the fact that they got into winners bracket and they didn't have to fall down to losers as the advantage. But yeah, I agree with you. They're definitely not going to change this if they have kind of an intended outcome here. Like they're getting a 60-40 split in winners and losers champions, I should say. So why would they change that? The only reason that they would change it really is if they wanted to achieve a 50-50 split, which from a league's perspective, that makes perfect sense because it gives the losers bracket team and its fans probably an OpTic, a FAZE, an LAT specifically, it gives them hope that, like, yeah, there is a 50-50 chance that we'll actually win the grand finals now that we lost in the winners bracket, which to me makes sense. I disagree with some of the players in the comments because I understand, like, I don't disagree that they shouldn't want fairness and the competitive integrity to be taken into account, but I also understand as a fan, if let's just say it was 80-20 and that my team only had a 20% chance of winning the championship after losing one match, I would feel some type of way. Like I feel like there would be kind of a little bit of resentment of like why can't we have like more of an advantage or less of a disadvantage, even if that's not fair or right or competitive just in any sense. But like you said, Daniel's job is not necessarily to make it as fair for everybody. It's to really make it as entertaining as possible. And I think that they have achieved that to an extent. But of course, I am a fan of the continuation. If you played someone and you 3-0'd them in the winner's bracket, it should be 3-0 to start the grand finals. And the only way to really make that into something entertaining is you play 11 maps and you still have to win 4 maps in the grand finals to win the championship. So that's how I would do it. And I think if those teams didn't play in the winners bracket, I think it should be an automatic 3-0 start for that team and that came from winners bracket, because that would make actually quite a bit of sense. Versus like starting it at 3-2 and it's like, well, they didn't play each other. They don't really have any history with each other. So that's my preferred way. But like you said, like it really isn't about us. It's not about what we want or what we like or what we prefer. It is about what the general population that I think are not watching the CDL, which is funnily enough, how things work out. Like they are catering to that audience and trying to get those people to understand and pay attention to the CDL. And I think in fairness to them, this is a really tough job because no traditional sport has this problem, because whether it's the Super Bowl or the NBA Finals or the Stanley Cup Finals or the World Series, those teams play in completely different brackets and they meet at the end of, so they basically one winner of one bracket, one winner of another bracket, and then they meet in the championship game or series. That is not how the CDL works. I don't think that's ever how it will work. I don't even know how that would work to separate these two, like half the league and have them play through separate brackets to get to the championship. I don't think that's really what people want. That's just kind of a nature how traditional sports go, and esports doesn't have to adhere to that. But yeah, I think it's interesting. I like the conversation. I would like Daniel to weigh in more on not necessarily just this topic, but a lot of other things that people have been bringing up about the CDL, and I hope he does. But yeah, this is a good first step to actually have some conversation. They got some pretty direct feedback because I saw like half of the CDL in his comments after he posted this, so I think that's always good to hear about. I think other than that, before we get into the matches, so Blaze, I saw that he had posted on Twitter that he was looking for more work over the next few months, and he posted a few days ago. He said, "Hey, I want to be transparent with you all. I found out today I will not be going to Major 2. They're using a stage host local to the region this season. Whoever is up there, please make sure to show them respect and a lot of love. It's not an easy job, and they deserve the support. Of course, it stings that after 8 years, I won't be a staple of the broadcast, but honestly, I've had an incredible run. I'm grateful for every moment. Thank you for embracing me, for cheering me on, for making me feel like I belong in the community from day one. COD family has been the highlight of my career, and I mean that with my whole heart." So obviously that sucks for him. I would imagine it will be an English guy hosting the second major. I mean, it is what it is. Like the CDL has kind of pared back a lot of its talent over the years. We've seen them become like not full-time employees, but contractors and everything. So it seems like that's just kind of an extension of what's going on. What did you think of this?
Yeah, I think that's, end of the day, obviously wishing Blaze the best, and uh, you know, for fans of his and whatnot, it's going to be unfortunate, but I do think, from a business standpoint, this is probably an area that it makes like as maybe as bad as this might sound, like if the CDL is making cuts like this to the broadcast talent and stuff, I would say that somebody in Blaze's position, like that host position, is probably the most expendable. Just in the sense, like some like Miles or Maven could do those introductions, and I'm pretty sure they have in the past. Um, so from like a pure business perspective, I can't really you know, fault the CDL for potentially going this route. I will say people were bringing up, I believe it was last year, at the Madrid major, but I can't remember for sure. There was an event where they had a Hispanic or Hispanic host, and so like somebody posted. I think it was CDL Intel, but I can't remember. Somebody like posted an interview of them with Celium, and like Celium couldn't even understand the questions and stuff like that. So that is, on the other hand here, and potential issue if they are going with, like, let's just say there's the Paris major coming up. If we have a primarily French speaking host for that event and their English isn't the best, that could lead to some awkward post game interviews and whatnot. So that is one other side of this. But yeah, I wishing Blaze the best. It will be interesting to see how this plays out. But unfortunately, I don't think this is a massive blow to the CDL or anything like that.
And the only other thing was that there was a new Elo site. I think it was the Hover Point, the Fang
I don't
Hover
know.
Point. But people were obviously talking about it because it was going on in CDL. Did you notice how big of a difference did you notice about the new Elo?
Well, I mentioned Tremi, and obviously shout out Tremi, who's been at the Olympics are in Italy, right?
Yeah,
Milan. I don't even know what country, but he's been away, so he hasn't been playing the game, and I'm pretty sure this site was added in season 2. But I still went to our head Ego Chall correspondent for the inside info here on this Elo site, and um, he told me that it's already banned and ranked, which
yeah,
I didn't even know. And that's like pretty confusing to me why it would be banned in ranked play, but it's not. It's being allowed in the actual CDL matches. The only thing I could think of is because like something with like the patch or whatever, like not aligning with the current patch for ranked, but then at the same time, like the site wouldn't be in the game if the patches were potentially off. So I don't really know what the deal is here. I do think it is pretty interesting that players were willing to, just completely swap to a brand new red dot site like that, like seemingly pretty quickly. Again, I don't think it's like anything groundbreaking, but it's something that caught my attention, and I felt it was at least worth bringing up, and we'll have to see, how it plays out. There have been other years, and long time ago, people using different reticles for the red dot, like different colors for the red dot, like a blue dot, purple dot,
hmm
all that, and different sites itself. So um nothing major in terms of that, but it will be interesting to see how, like, maybe this is just an experiment thing, or maybe this is something that'll stick for the rest of the year.
yeah. Let's get into the matches. Friday, February 20th, we started off with FaZe versus Vancouver. Pretty straightforward win for FaZe Vegas here. Some competitive maps, I would say, but ultimately a sweep for FaZe 3-0. Something we expect of these two teams. FaZe certainly one of the top 4 teams in the league. Vancouver probably bottom 2, bottom 3. We'll talk about their other match. They're not bottom 1 right now, unfortunately for my Breach boys. But yeah, FaZe wins 3-0. And I don't know if you wanted to bring in their second match because that one
Yeah,
is
that's fine.
far more interesting. And that was so they played the very first match of the weekend and also the very last match. And so FaZe 3-0'd Vancouver. In their last match, they played G2 Minnesota. We talked about it, obviously, at the end of last show. and we said that this is, I believe, the third, or this would be the fourth time that they had played in the last 5 or 6 weeks or something like that. Pretty close matches together, and that G2 had come out on top in the first two matches and then lost in the losers bracket of Major 1 to FaZe, which is of course not what you want, because that means that G2 went home before they were definitely ready to, and then they play here, and it is a 3-2 win for G2. So 4 matches between the two teams, 3-1 record for G2 Minnesota. It comes down to a Game 5 Colossus S&D. G2 wins that. They win both of the S&Ds in this series. And really just kind of a kryptonite to FaZe right now, because the hard points certainly were heavily in favor of FaZe, but the S&Ds were heavily in favor of G2. So what do you think of this? The fact that a team that I think we both thought was middle of the pack, probably at best, maybe even lower depending on where they were that specific week, is now like a true contender, or just seems to be better than FaZe when they go head to head.
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to last week. Or earlier this week, we're doing the power rankings episodes, and I was just a little more hesitant to put FaZe as high up, and that was falling after their loss against Miami. So I'm not trying to. It would be pretty easy with lumping these two matches to jump all over the place with with the other teams involved, but um in terms of FaZe this weekend, I think it's another 1-1 week where I I was not expecting them to go 1-1.
Mm-hmm.
I think this was a little less surprising than the Miami loss, just because of the history so far earlier this year for G2 versus Miami. I even said when we were doing our predictions, like if we didn't pick the Carolina Falcons match separately, I was going to pick the opposite of you
Mm-hmm.
in this FaZe G2 match, just to make sure we had something different, because it felt like to me those were like the two matches that really had a chance to truly go either way in some regard, and based on the history there. Um, but yeah, I really it just doesn't make a ton of sense to me how this G2 team, like, I'd have to go back and look at all the matches to see the map breakdowns and stuff, because obviously we talked about the Colossus hardpoint and the Kremp losses before. I saw that map was a part of this matchup for G2 FaZe. Uh, G2 wins games 2 and 3. The ending to game 3 was very close. Like, FaZe got shut down just before punching in a fourth cap to potentially force overtime. But regardless of that, like, G2 up 2-1 going into potentially their best hardpoint map, and FaZe just absolutely stomping them. All the G2 players going negative and getting heavily outslayed. Uh, that had me thinking, like, okay, we're going to a game 5. G2's lost 5 game 5s in a row. We've heard this story multiple times with G2 and Minnesota now, and then they just win the game 5, because why not? So
Yeah.
I am not in a better spot right now with this FaZe team. I still, like, when I said last time we recapped the week 1 matches with the Miami loss, I really didn't have a good explanation for that. And now with this G2 match in particular, how it went down with, like you said, FaZe winning both hard points, but G2 winning both searches and winning in a game 5 when historically they've struggled in game 5s. I really don't have a good answer. I think the one thing uh, to note in particular for G2, and it was kind of a theme, maybe I'm mixing up their other match in my head, but I know for this one in particular, Skies played pretty well, had the highest KD on G2, and obviously when G2's losing, they pull a Neslo off, so you're not expecting crazy KDs when especially when FaZe wins 2 dominant hard points. But the fact Skies was the only player with a positive KD on Minnesota is noteworthy, just because of all the chatter and hubbub around him and potential, should G2 drop him to look for an upgrade, yada yada. Like, it shows he's playing well against a quote unquote top team like FaZe. That bodes well for him and him sticking around. I just don't know really what this means for FaZe. I really just have a lot of questions right now in terms of like how this is happening. I would love to hear from like Crowder or Simp or any of them in terms of what they think is the exact cause of the two losses they have so far in these major two qualifiers. And then just real quick to lump in that first match on Friday for Vancouver and FaZe, obviously a pretty convincing, quick series, but I did want to shout out Lunars had 1.07 KD, the only positive KD on Vancouver. I think Lunars has just been playing pretty well overall, especially since that. Uh, I feel safe calling it his breakout series when they won at Major 1 in the loser bracket. He had like a 1.5 or whatever in that first round matchup there at the Major, and I feel like since then that's given him a lot of confidence, and I like what I've seen out of him even in a series like this where FaZe did get a pretty convincing 3-0 win.
So FaZe have now lost 6 matches this season. 3 of them have been to Minnesota. The others have been to LAT, Miami, and Paris, I believe. So like, I don't even know what you do with that. Like, I do think, and I said this, multiple weeks ago, right, where Minnesota was probably just thought to be too, probably too, like, people just thought too lowly of them. They thought because they weren't winning the game 5s, then that meant that they were not good or whatever. But I think that's obviously not the case. We know that they're a talented team. They have something. I don't know if it's a championship contending level something, but I certainly think that we're in kind of a weird space now with Minnesota where it kind of bore out in our power rankings where we did not see them as like the top echelon of teams, and maybe we shouldn't have put FaZe in that top echelon. I guess that remains to be seen. But they're certainly capable of beating those top teams like FaZe. So I think this is really interesting result. It's even more puzzling because we saw how badly they played in their first match of the week. So it really is kind of just confusing to think about, all things considered, because you have, on one hand, you have FaZe. They go 1-1 this week. They beat the team that we know they should beat. There's no way that they should lose to that team. And then they lose to a team that I think most people would consider them to be more talented than and should be able to beat, but they lost to them. For G2, it's kind of similar for them as well, because their first match of the week they play Toronto, and Toronto is bringing in Kips for his first match. He's making his CDL, or I don't think he was making his CDL debut in that match. Maybe, he had already played one match the day before, but he's playing his second CDL match, his second day of CDL action, and it's a 3-0 win for Toronto, albeit some competitive maps, around 11 S&D win, but Toronto certainly seemed like the better team there than G2. And then they go into that second match against FaZe in the final match of the week, and they beat them. So maybe that's just online COD. Maybe that's something we have to get used to, especially in this game. It seems to be even crazier than usual. What'd you want?
I was just gonna. I was gonna bring up again. We talked about it at one point this season. I just, as a refresher, the Vanguard effect of the coin flip. Like, maybe this is the closest we've been to that again in a while, because that was a pretty funky year where it felt like for multiple teams you could flip a coin going into a certain series, and it would that coin would have a better chance of guessing who would win the match than actually just go with your gut.
Yeah, I think that's probably right, because we have seen some weird results. We'll get to like the Vancouver stuff and like how they're basically, like you said, farming Boston Bucks, I think, in the pre-show, and that seems pretty spot on. But we've seen some other results where it just doesn't make a lot of sense, but maybe we just have to kind of come to the realization that it's not going to make a lot of sense, and that you're going to have to deal with it, and that there's going to be upsets, or maybe they're not even upsets. Maybe just some teams are going to be a little more inconsistent than we previously imagined them to be. I think we should just talk real briefly about or we don't have to speak super briefly, but the Toronto G2 match, because it does kind of, like I mentioned it, but like the fact that Kipps has like actually a pretty good series in this match. He has two great respawns. Toronto nearly just absolutely dumpsters Minnesota in the S&D, which again makes it even more confusing that they end up winning two S&Ds against FaZe very convincingly. So what do you make of
Yep.
this? How much can you actually take away from something like this, especially for Minnesota? And then on the flip side, Toronto gets their first win with Kipps. They break their, I think, 7 or 8 match losing streak. So a lot of things going on here in this match.
Yeah, I mean that's what I was kind of teasing. Like, it would have been easy to talk about four potential teams there with the just talking
Mm-hmm.
about FaZe really, because yeah, it was basically FaZe beats Vancouver, Vancouver somehow beats Boston, G2 beats FaZe, but somehow G2 loses to Toronto. So it's like there's a lot of domino effects here going on. But yeah, this is pretty in now in hindsight. I'm even more confused about this because this is gonna I'm gonna sound like a broken record by the end of this episode eventually, but it's similar with Falcons in a sense this week as well. Like, Falcons played Cloud9, had some actual close matches against a Cloud9, especially given the state of Cloud9 and expectations for them. And then Falcons come out and just absolutely dumpster Carolina. So there were multiple sets of matches this week that had results where it was just like, okay, what the hell is going on here? But this is another example here where I don't have a great um explanation. I do think, this is going to loop in Toronto's first match a little bit as well, but I did think Kipps played pretty well, all things considered, for his first two matches in the CDL. His first hard point against LAT, he got off to a really strong start, and I didn't put it down in the notes, but he was like almost double positive at one point, like within two sets of rotations. I want to say he was like 19 and 10 or something close, give or take a few kills and deaths there through a couple rotations. And then he slowed down towards the end of the match. Ironically, it was at the same time Abeezy started to heat up, but we'll get into that later. Um, I think in terms of the G2 Toronto match, like I said, Kipps definitely showed me something, and I think um, pretty evident that he is immediately just a statistical upgrade to what Real had been producing in both roles for him lately, which is unfortunate to say as a Real fan, but just seems to be the case so far, and it still could be a honeymoon phase a little bit for this Toronto team, and that could be one explanation for how Toronto was able to get the better of G2. But it is worth noting that in the S&D in particular, Toronto was up 4-0 and 5-1, and it ended up going to a round 11. Because I was kind of that was on Saturday. I think I was like in and out a little bit at the start of that match, and I saw it was I knew it was 5-1 at one point, and I was hoping, because again I've brought up the full sale a couple times. I was hoping it was a full sale opportunity again, but it wasn't. It was a 4-0, and then G2 won the fifth round to make it 4-1. But still a pretty impressive string of rounds from G2 to force the round 11. It's just the Minnesota case up to this point. Another round 11 doesn't go their way, but keeping that in mind, although they did lose the S&D to Toronto, that's still like being able to string rounds together like that, plus the S&D wins against FaZe, plus having guys like Kremp and Skies on a team, like, it's not really very surprising that Minnesota should see success in S&D. They got Looney as their coach. Looney was a pretty clutch S&D player in his own right in his playing days. Like, it makes sense that they would be a team that has some success in S&D, but ultimately they weren't able to get the round 11 win here, and I just think that it's you know for Toronto, they obviously they see one go through the hoop, and good for them. But in the context of everything that we've talked about so far, the fact that G2 were stomped by Toronto, who hadn't won a series yet in the qualifiers up to that point, and we're able to respond with a win over FaZe, that just has me more confused than we were talking 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, I just think for Toronto is huge because now there is some light at the end of the tunnel. I don't think that would be all doom and gloom because they go 0-2 with Kips, but I just think that if you have this losing streak that just keeps going on even after you make the roster change and you lose, granted they lose to two pretty good teams, I just think it would be pretty kind of heartbreaking for Toronto to just not, especially if they somehow lost this series where they start off so well and then say they lose that round 11. And who knows how the rest of the series actually goes, but a huge win for Toronto. It would have been really bad to start 0-4 in the qualifiers and to have this losing streak still going on going into the next week. As for G2, it's kind of the opposite. Like they get like a really down moment here where they're like, how the hell did we lose this team? And especially in this way. And then they come back and they beat a top 4 or top 5 team. So I think it all kind of, they both should feel pretty good going into next week for various different reasons. But I think it's interesting that Toronto was able to pull off this win. We will talk about their first match of the week here in just a little bit. But I want to jump back to day one now because obviously we're trying to work our way through the schedule. But Falcons versus C9, I don't feel like there's a lot of tentacles to this one. We have talked about, or you specifically talked about the similarities between this C9 roster and that original Vegas Falcons roster from last year. They're all Saudi team. And obviously Falcons had a horrible start to this qualifiers. C9, I don't think we expect very much of them, but I think it is notable that C9 was able to win a map in this series. They win Scar S&D after starting down 3-0 in the search, and then they come back. They win 6. They win 6 straight, but otherwise this was like a fairly decisive Falcons win, especially the last map of the series, 250 to 83 Den Hard Point. We haven't seen a ton of 100-point clubs this season, but this was certainly one of them, and C9 looked just as much as, or just about as well as you think a all challengers team playing in whatever their third match in the CDL. That's about what you would expect of them in this match, I think. What did you think overall of this series?
Yeah, I kind of prefaced it a little bit, especially these first 2 maps of this series. I was a little worried about Falcons, just the fact it was only a 40-point hard point in the map 1, and Okus like started 2-18 at one point. I was watching Zuma's stream for the watch party, and he was like, he wasn't rooting for it because obviously Okus is one of the stallions, but like they were joking about obviously the Zuma having the 4-23 map that everybody jokes about. They were like, oh, if it doesn't happen here, this is the closest we're ever getting to it potentially happening again. And then Okus turned it around and got back to 16-32, all things considered. But with him dropping a 0.5 in that map, and it's still only a 40-point win for Falcons, it was kind of a little concerning for me. And then Falcons go up 3-0 in the S&D, and you're thinking they're on the road to a convincing 3-0 series, but they lose 6 straight rounds to this Falcons team, to the Cloud9 team, and Cloud9 in this iteration get their first map win, I believe, here. So then I'm just like, okay, what the hell is going on with Falcons? And then the next 2 maps were much more convincing and much more in line with what we, most people were expecting for any team versus this Cloud9 roster at this stage. But yeah, at least at the start of the series, I was definitely a little like just puzzled in terms of what's going on with Falcons here. But end of the day, win's a win. They did beat the team in front of them they were supposed to beat. Maybe just was a little tougher than it had to be.
This definitely felt like a Vegas Falcons series, because we saw that last year where they'd have like an S&D, for example, and they would go to round 11, or it would be 6-4 and they'd lose, and sometimes they obviously won maps. It wasn't like they were getting swept every single time they played, but then you'd see other maps and it would be like 250 to 108, and you're like, yep, that makes a lot of sense how that works. And I think that's what we saw here with C9. Like, there is some potential. There isn't, like, I don't think these guys are completely hopeless or anything, and I don't think either of us really ever thought that. But as a team, they're just in a really tough spot because they came into a team that didn't have very many wins. They aren't like protecting any kind of lead, and they don't have a lot of infrastructure, it seems, to around them to help them out, and they don't have any veterans on their team. So like, there's a lot of things working against them. But I think they showed some things, some good things here. And like you said, the fact that they made that first hard point even reasonably close when one of the guys is going 16 and 32 and starting 2 and 18, that's a good sign. Like, their moral victories are kind of the name of the game here for C9, I believe, as they continue on. And then the last match on Friday was Toronto versus LAT. Of course, we talked about Toronto's second match. Toronto does lose this one. This was Kip's debut in the CDL. And I think he had like a overall like decent series. You know, he had I think this is a tough first match, as we talked about many times before. You kind of want to start off against the Vancouvers or the C9s of the world typically, or maybe even the Boston Breaches, but you don't want to start off against LAT. Of course, LAT, they are still kind of working through things with Neum, who is in his second week. And like you pointed out last week, Neum versus Kips, two Huntsman players facing off against each other. And it was only a few weeks ago that they were in Challengers together. Now they're playing each other in the CDL, which has to be pretty cool. But LAT, I would say, edge out a win here. Like, it wasn't incredibly decisive. It was a 29-point hardpoint win, round 11 S&D. Toronto ends up winning the overload, and then LAT does kind of pull away in that Colossus hardpoint to make it a pretty commanding victory. But overall thoughts on, I guess, LAT kind of continuing to do what we think they should, and that's just win matches no matter how they look. And then Toronto, we talked about how they actually ended up, but what did you think of Kips and his debut? You're muted.
Sorry. Like I said, when we were looping in the Toronto G2 match, Kips got off to a pretty hot start. In this map one in particular, and he cooled off towards the end, but the fact that he's, top of the leaderboard, tied with Kleenex and Joe, 29 kills, the most for Toronto in map one, all of them. Pretty good sign, especially given the level of competition he's playing against.
Mm-hmm.
The thing stood out to me the most in this map one was Abizi, though. While Kips was off to a hot start, Abizi got off to a pretty slow start, and then it felt like to me he took the AR out for a large majority of the middle of this map, and he went on a pretty lengthy streak. And if it wasn't like one streak, it was like multiple, like 3-4 streaks, because it felt like I saw a lot of him using the AR on this map, which is just something we haven't seen a ton of from Abizi in previous years, but it's something I mentioned at some point this year during the Major 1 qualifiers, I believe, and it's just, maybe this is, the ways these maps have played. I feel like Scar is one of those maps we have seen teams on certain hills pull out more than just 2 ARs, and this could be something that LAT look to utilize, especially to me at least. In this map, it felt like Abizi was struggling early on, pulls out the AR, and he's able to turn things around, leads to a LAT win. Like that could be something that LAT looks towards in future matchups as well. But I think I kind of painted the Neum picture in this way last time. Map 1 here, Scrap drops 38. Map 4, Hydra drops 35. Abizi drops 30 in both hard points. Neum hasn't had to do more than what he's done so far to give LAT a chance to win. And I think that's, something that we're going to have to keep an eye on as Neum gets more reps. But I also think it's a good, positive early sign because, like I said the last time we talked about it, like, you got MVP all-star caliber players and Scrap, Hydra, and Abizi. They just got to go out there and do their thing and play to that level, and this team should do well. It's when those guys are struggling, and then you have somebody like Kenny or Neum who statistically haven't had the strongest performances. When those two negatives clash, that's when you get a recipe for disaster for this LAT team. So I still am interested to see more from Neum and see him continue to grow on this team. But at least in terms of this match, I did think I liked what I saw early on from Kips. Still in the you know grand scheme of things, it's only two matches from Kips now, and four I believe from Neum. So a lot more COD to go and see from them to evaluate them. But um, given the state of Toronto heading into this match, like the fact that um, they even won an overload and they had a round 11 in the search and a 30-point hard point in map one, like a much more competitive series than potentially we would have seen from Toronto if they hadn't been proactive to make the Kips roster move.
Yeah, I don't know how much this series says about Toronto, considering what we got out of them in that second match of the week, and that's definitely the more impressive match for them and performance from them. But LAT, and I'll loop in their second match of the week because it's the next match that we haven't covered, and that was against Boston on Saturday, and that was probably one of the most dominant series that we got all weekend. It was a 3-0. The hard point was the only one that was like even remotely competitive because the S&D was 6-0, the overload was 7-0. So like it's very rare to get that kind of dominance. So LAT, I will say this. They have done everything that they have really needed to in these four matches with Neum. They're 4-0.
Yep.
They have, I think, the best map count of any team. I think they have 12-2. They lost one map against Vancouver last week, lost one map against Toronto that we just talked about, but otherwise have been really, really good. So, like, all the good aside, they have played four teams that I would consider to be subpar, like mediocre to subpar. Carolina is probably the best of those four teams. Toronto, maybe, I guess, depending on how good you think they are right now. But I just wanted to say that because we haven't gotten to see them against like really high level talent at all in these qualifiers yet. Of course, because they play every single CDL team, they will play those top teams, and we will get to see how well they fare against a Paris or an OpTic or whoever. But in these four matches, they have been pretty dominant and deserve that credit because that hasn't really been the case for LAT previously. Like, they played Toronto in obviously the Major 1 qualifiers, and that was a 3-0 sweep for Toronto. And they played some other matches where they seemed to be better and they just didn't show up or look to be as dominant as you might think they are. But what did you kind of see out of this LAT versus Boston series? Because, I mean, it's pretty rare to get three guys on one team dropping one kill each in S&D.
I'll tell you one thing. The first thought that went through my mind after that series ended was, can I change my Boston pick for the Vancouver Boston series? And obviously I didn't. But we joked about it when we were doing our predictions. Like, Vancouver had the reverse sweep over Boston in the Major 1 qualifiers. Could they have a shot here? And then we both ended up picking Boston because we were just like, I think Boston is the better team over Vancouver at this stage right now. But after seeing this series, I was just like, this Boston team is chalked. Like,
Yeah.
it was brutal to see what happened here. This was just an absolute DoorDash slamming, and it once again goes back to what I was alluding to with my outlook on this specific LAT roster. In the hard point, Scrap 38, Hydra 29, Scrap 8-0 in the S&D, Hydra 31, and Scrap 30 in the overload. Like, if those two are playing at that MVP All-Star level, it really, as long as those other guys aren't like absolutely dropping point ones, like, it really shouldn't be difficult for this LAT team to succeed. And now, like you alluded to, we have to see this Neum LAT roster compete against some of these other teams before we truly get a good look and evaluation of where this team stands, but I just think I've seen a lot more strong performances individually and statistically out of the All Stars on LAT with this iteration of the roster than I did previously. And Neum, for what it's worth, had it hit probably without looking. I would assume this was his best statistical series so far in the CDL, 56 and 46 for a 1.22 KD. So yeah, it could be a case where they're playing a team that's really struggling right now. But as we always say, you got to play the team put in front of you, and LAT didn't waste any time taking care of business in this one.
Yeah, I think LAT is, they did what we expected them to do. They've not always done that, especially against Boston. But I think what you said about Boston is correct. Like, this team is absolutely chalked. And I was just thinking about it, like, after the LAT loss. Even then, I was like, the problem with Boston right now is that they are just good enough. They're not good, but they're just good enough to avoid a roster change because they give whoever's making the changes, or probably the players too, they give themselves hope that, like, okay, we can do this, we can get to 8th place, we can get to a winner's bracket or whatever, because then they'll beat Vancouver. Then we saw what happened with Boston versus Vancouver, and Vancouver is like legitimately an awful team. They are like, I was just looking it up. They started the season off with 3 straight losses. Then they beat Boston. Then they got another 3 straight losses. They beat Carolina. Then they lost 3 straight matches. And then they beat Boston. So whoever plays them in 4 matches from now, be real worried about what's going to happen. That's the only way that they're able to win matches right now, is they take 3 games off and then they're like, all right, it's time to turn up. That's not a good thing. Unfortunately for Boston, this is the second time that it has happened to them. So Vancouver's 3 wins, 2 of them have come against the Breach. Yeah, I think it's over for my Boston Breach boys. Like, there's no way. Like, you can't be losing to probably the worst team, or maybe C9 is the worst now. But, like, either way, these were like the bottom 2 teams, and now you've lost to now you've lost. I think Boston might have lost the C9 as well, if I'm not mistaken. I think that no, C9's only win was against Vancouver, right? I think, but okay. Otherwise, like, it's over. Like, is it time to break this Breach team up, in your opinion?
Oh yeah, absolutely, got to blow it up. I think we talked about it last episode, and obviously, given the state of Toronto and the fact they did get a win over G2, I don't know how likely Toronto is to make another move. I did text you something earlier in the week, and I didn't put it in the notes, but like Benjay was talking to some agent, and a player agent allegedly said that 4 teams are going to make a roster change this upcoming week. So that'll be really interesting to see if that happens. And I feel like if that is the case, Boston has to be one of the teams that makes a change. It just makes a ton of sense. But I think if they do make a change, I don't really like, from a financial or roster construction standpoint, it doesn't make a ton of sense for Boston to get rid of Nasty, just because we have both alluded to the fact that he's been one of their best players, and statistically this week in particular, he played very well. So, you want to argue Nasty's been their best player this year. I got no problem with that. And if a team gets rid of their best player when they're struggling, that doesn't make a ton of sense. But for Nasty's sake, I really hope he gets moved to a different team somehow, some way right now. And I saw Octane tweeted like free Byron, and I saw like the hashtag going in I think, I don't remember which stream I had. I either had the CDL stream or Zuma's stream on my Mac during this match. But yeah, like I think it is time for Boston to make a move now. Will they actually do it is another question entirely. We've highlighted multiple times the financial situation and question marks surrounding the Boston organization. I did even see somebody mention that Boston should give, or Robert Kraft should give Dave Portnoy the spot and make it the Boston Bush. That would be a pipe dream, and I definitely don't see that happening. But there is a bit of a history there between Kraft and Portnoy, so it wouldn't be the craziest thing to dream up. But that's probably more of an off-season wish than something to happen in the middle of the season now. But nevertheless, I think this is just Boston definitely have to do something. The question of whether they actually will make a move or not, I could see them sticking, and it would really, I would feel bad for Nasty at that point, especially coming off the year he had last season where he was in multiple grand finals and wasn't able to get it done. I would, I'd feel bad for him if he's in a position now where, especially as a European player, he like if Boston struggles, they might not even make it to uh, Major Two, and that would be heartbreaking for him, I'm sure, as a European player. So, um, yeah, was not expecting, well, going into the weekend, pick Boston. We joked about the reverse sweep for Vancouver last time, and then after I saw Boston versus LAT, I was fully thinking Vancouver was actually going to beat this team, and they did it. I think Gwynn had a really strong series, which I feel like we haven't seen a ton of really like Gwinnernet-esque series from him yet this year. TJ drops 92 kills, and Lunars has another 1.23 strong showing, and then it's just Nasty with a 1.18 for Boston, and the next highest is Purge with a 0.83. So again, KDs aren't everything, but um, just at this point, I feel like Boston has to make a change, but I honestly don't know if they will.
Yeah, I don't know if they will. I was just thinking like the four teams, if that's true, and four teams end up making a change this week in the CDL. I cannot really think of the teams. Like, I think it would make a lot more sense if it was like before this week, like four teams had decided we're going to make a change, and like Falcons is one of those teams. Like, that would make sense considering how they started. But then they go 2-0 this week. Does that change the calculus at all? Like you said, does Toronto, they were probably going to make another change. Does that change how they feel about it now that they beat G2? Would G2 decide to make a change because they lose a match that they probably shouldn't have, but then they win a match? Like, and obviously Boston, it's more just like, what is the change? Or Carolina, you could also lump in there as like, what is the change there? Like, do you have anybody that can like you can feel comfortable about? And I think C9 would probably be like the pretty obvious one of like, yeah, you could always see them bringing in a new challengers player to replace like Okus, for example. Like, he has a really bad week, they make a change. Like, I can see a potential four teams, but it doesn't feel like four teams would actually make a move. What do you think?
I think at the time of that
Yeah.
tweet, it was probably more considered that the whole Toronto making an extra move and potentially the Nasty 2 Toronto move could have been like more leaning towards actually happening, and that would make sense to me because that's two teams making a change right there if that happens. Um, but yeah, without that happening, I really don't know. I mean, Carolina could decide to make a change. I would be surprised just given their, they would be basically just scrapping the early online success that they had at Major One, but they had that happen last season when they made the Vivid change. So um, yeah, I'm not really sure, but I certainly wouldn't mind if four teams changed because that would give us more to talk about.
Yeah, certainly. I think if there are four teams, like let's just say that four teams actually do make a change this coming week, I think the four are C9 bringing in just a new challengers player. I don't know if there's like anyone specific, but I think it's just like a low cost, low risk thing for them considering they're not winning. Toronto replacing Insight. Carolina, I really don't know who like is like really on the chopping block there. Um, and just Boston. Like those four teams, to some extent, are kind of like just spinning their wheels a little bit. Toronto's a little bit different because they obviously just beat G2, but you could also just argue like that's like fool's gold. Like if you just keep going down this path where like it's just easier to bring in Nasty, for example, and be like, we're gonna have 7 online matches to work with him. We're gonna have 3 weeks to really 3-4 weeks to practice with him, rather than like kind of wasting 1 or 2 matches, wasting 1 or 2 weeks of practice with Insight when you feel like you could upgrade with Nasty. So I think those are the 4 teams. Do you agree, disagree with that?
I think it's easier to like going down the list. LAT not going to make a change.
Nope.
OpTic not going to make a change. Paris not going to make a change. Do you think FAZE? I mean, FAZE could, but I'm going to put them in the group of not making a change. Um, Before this week, maybe Falcons, like you said,
Yeah.
maybe G2. I would even say maybe Vancouver would consider it, but after this one, maybe Vancouver doesn't. So then that really leaves you with the group of Cloud9, Boston, Toronto, Carolina, and I think that's everybody I mentioned. And I don't know if Toronto's going to end up making another change. I don't think Cloud9 makes another move. I think, with the reports going on about the spending and whatever for them, I don't know how many other people are going to be willing to sign with Cloud9 for
Yep.
the 24,000 or whatever the reported number is right now. So I think I think the situation has evolved since that tweet came out about 4 teams potentially changing, and I would just be happy to see just Boston change at the very least right now. I'd settle for that, but if more teams do change, I'll be happy to talk about it.
Yeah, I think we'll hopefully we'll get something by the next show that we do, and people will actually make their changes and announce them and all that. I'm trying to look for the next match that we have not talked about. I think it was Gentlemates versus Carolina on Saturday.
Correct.
Um, Again, like we just talked about Carolina in the context of potentially making a change to their roster. They, of course, won 5 straight qualifier matches to end the Major 1 qualifiers. They go on to a Major 1, and then they have like a pretty poor start. I can't say like a tremendously bad start, but like definitely were not as hot as they were to end the Major 1 qualifiers. And then they lose to Paris. I will say it was pretty competitive. They had a real chance of forcing a game 5 on Colossus Hardpoint. That just obviously didn't happen. Ends up being a 250-242 win for the Gentlemates, and that makes it a 3-1 series win. Is this like, is the honeymoon just completely over for Carolina, or did you kind of see some hope there here, considering they are playing the defending major champions?
Well, I think the answer to both well, no, it's different answers. I think there was something that we'll talk about in a second, but I do think the honeymoon is just over for this Carolina team, and especially given their following result with a 3-0 loss to Falcons, and that was a pretty convincing series in itself. Like I think the honeymoon's over for Carolina, and like I was just saying, I don't know if they really would make another move. I do think, in particular in this series, Lurks played pretty well in all of the maps for Carolina. Um, Sib has a .65 KD in this win, 70 and 107. And I think I was watching the Zuma watch party at this point, and they were just joking about like Sib, like, just not showing up for the online matches, but he had a monster series in the grand finals, and he played really well on LAN at Major 1, so they were kind of joking about that. The bigger thing with this series, just overall, which I was hoping I saw a tweet on the timeline from one of the stats accounts, and I didn't, I forgot to go back and look a second time, but I was looking at the end of these matches on Saturday to see if anybody said anything. But there was a 32 kill difference between Carolina and Gentlemates in the map 4, in a map where Carolina loses by 8 points.
Mm-hmm.
So Nero drops 48 kills. The Lurks has 38. Craze has 37, and Exceed has 34. The 34 from Exceed is what it is. The highest on Gentlemates for this match was Ghosty at 37. So the third most kills on Carolina was tied for the most on Gentlemates. And Gentlemate still won this map, and I was hoping one of the accounts was able to dig up something like in terms of what is the biggest kill deficit that has actually resulted in a hardpoint win. I feel pretty safe in saying this would be the record. I cannot think of any off the top of my head. 32 kill difference is a lot. That's a lot even for a team to win a hard point by
Mhm.
like 250 to 100. So the fact that Gentlemaites were down 32 kills and still won this hard point, that blew my mind. And maybe I got to do some digging after the show to see if anybody did tweet anything out in terms of like if that is the record or not. But I feel pretty safe in saying I think that is one of the strangest final results for a hardpoint map in CDL history. But that's championship DNA right there from Gentlemates, and that might be you know exaggerating a little bit, but I think if you're able to get outslayed that heavily and still win a hard point, like that just shows the makeup of this team and what they're capable of. So I know it's one online hard point map, but um, yeah, at the end of the day, like you said, they Carolina pretty could have easily closed that one out and forced a game 5, and then who knows what happens and how we're talking about both of these teams. But Gentlemates were able to get a strange game 4 win to close out the series.
It's not too dissimilar to when Paris played C9, and C9 probably could have swept that match, and Paris ends up winning. And I think what I said at the time, and I still believe to be true, is like the best teams will figure out a way to win, even if it's really ugly and it looks like they should lose that match. Like you just said, like Paris should not win that second hard point. It should have went to a game 5, but they just made the right plays. I don't know who would actually have the highest kill deficit for a win. I feel like semi confident that OpTic might have like the highest kill deficit for a loss. Like maybe not this specific OpTic team, but um, the dynasty team where they kind of run up the score on some teams and still lose a hard point map here and
Oh,
there.
I thought you
That
were
feels
talking about the
like
0-18 team.
oh no no no. I was just thinking like because that's always been like an OpTic thing is like they just have so much talent that they slay the hell out of teams, but everybody's too busy worrying about kills that sometimes the hill doesn't get taken care of and it creates some issues. That's not how I typically think about Carolina, so I don't know how to kind of reframe that in my mind, but yeah, Carolina, they lose this one, but the way worse loss is to Falcons for sure. Like they play on Sunday, that was the first match, and they nearly get 100 point club to start off the series. They lose 6-3 in the S&D, and then they lose in overtime and overload. But like they get swept by the Falcons, who before this week were like at a pretty low point, and we were just talking about like it would make sense if they made a roster change. And now we're talking completely differently. Carolina goes 0-2 this week. Falcons go 2-0. The Royal Ravens just completely look lost now, and I don't I don't know if like there's a way back. Like it was very surprising when they went on their win streak, and I mentioned like if they keep playing like this, then Exceed for MVP is like probably like a real thing. I don't know if those odds are being taken at any local sports book anymore. Like it's pretty low. And the Falcons, on the other hand, they have to feel very good after a pretty abysmal start to, or I guess, the end to the first major and then start to the major 2 qualifiers. Was there anything good here from Carolina, or was this just like a one-way traffic exhibition for Falcons?
I mean, the exposure overload went to overtime. I guess that's the biggest positive for Carolina here. But yeah, especially those first 2 maps, pretty convincing. Xnid has been playing pretty solidly. I just noticed that I've typed his name in a bunch of these notes recently. It feels like a bit more here and there. So, and we've talked about Kiz too. Kismet's had a couple of pretty decent performances this weekend as well. So, um, I think that's a good sign for Falcons in terms of like we know what we should get and what we should expect from Pred and Celium. on a regular basis, especially given like the reported salary numbers and everything. Like they're being paid to be the superstars of this team. When those other two guys are playing at a high level too, this Falcons team could be dangerous. And I know these are matches um, against Cloud9 and Carolina, so it is what it is. But again, you got to play the teams put in front of you. They're playing everybody this split, so I'm excited to see more of this Falcons team. But I think we joked about it last episode. Like Falcons went 0-2 to start the Major 1 qualifiers, and then they ran off 5 straight. So Falcons went 0-2 and started the Major 2 qualifiers. They might win 9 straight, and then these qualifiers 9-2.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, we're we're thinking a lot of trends. Maybe Falcons just start 0-2 and then they win, and then that I don't know how that overlaps with Vancouver and they're 3 off, 1 on. But we'll figure it out. We'll set like a little calendar reminder for everybody's wins. I think Falcons. I still could understand if they made a roster change despite this 2-0 week. I know people would probably be like pretty upset about it, but the fact is you beat C9 and Carolina, 2 teams that are like Carolina obviously felt like a contender going into Major 1, but like at this point in time, like we know that isn't the case anymore. And then C9 is, potentially the worst team in the league. So like again, that's kind of like a Toronto situation where does 1 week override some of the bad things that you saw before this week and some of the weaknesses. Like if you were to replace Kismet with Nasty, just for an example, like you would feel probably a lot better about Falcons going into the rest of these qualifiers or not, right?
That's a tough one just because of how highly I think of Kismet and this whole like the role situation for him. From a pure role standpoint, though, getting Nasty on that second AR for this team, and if Xnid keeps playing the way he's been playing, like from just a pure role standpoint, that would be kind of interesting. But I know you've talked about Kismet more in terms of like looking at his role. I am still of the belief that if Falcons were to make a change, I would like to see them add frankly, I would like to see them add Nasty in place of Xnid, get Kismet on that second sub with Pred, and then have Kismet, Pred, Celium, and Nasty. I think Xnid's played pretty well lately, so I don't think they're going to consider that. I also think of the whole, the Saudi situation. They most likely aren't going to move Xnid anytime soon. So yeah, I don't know what Falcons would do if they make a change. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious if Falcons were to make a change, it would be for Xnid or Kismet. At this point, especially given the way Xnid has played lately, maybe it is just a case of Kismet would be the odd man out, but I think we've learned, like, it's not quite the Vivid thing of, like, drop Vivid and then you're terrible, but I would feel really bad about being in a situation where I was the team that dropped Kismet and let him go to another team that could potentially turn things around.
I think of it not like the exact same situation, but not too different from the Real thing with Toronto, where it's like I think he has a lot of potential, and we've seen him realize that potential even like somewhat recently, as recently as last year. And yet when it came time for Toronto to make a change, we were both in agreement, like he's the odd man out just based on these roles. And I feel like that is the same situation that the Falcons are in, because it seems like they're ride or die with Xnid. And obviously Pred and Cell are untouchable for this team, like if you actually have championship aspirations. So then there's only one spot to kind of look to. And I personally believe that if you're a team like either the Falcons or Toronto, who could compete for a championship, maybe they won't win, but I think they could be in that top 4 conversation by the end of the year, then you have to strike while the iron is hot and while there is an iron to strike, because like Nasty is there. Nasty is on a bottom feeder. They are not going anywhere. They're going in the complete wrong direction now. He is probably the best available AR right now, because you're not going to get someone like Ghosty, for example. Like that was the issue with Toronto in the offseason, is that they didn't get Ghosty. They didn't get that AR that they really needed to kind of shore up some of the role issues that they have, or kind of paper over some of the role issues. So this is a second chance for both Falcons and for Toronto, where Nasty's there. Go see if Boston will actually part ways with him. So that's why I think the Falcons, like, there is a chance that they make a change. I think that of the like 5 or so teams that we talked about as like a potential roster change this week, I think they're the least likely, just because they had this 2-0 week. Teams, even though they don't want to say it, like, they do see these results and it's like, well, we can't do that. The fans will be like really up our ass about it. But like, I personally think that like beating these two teams is not that great of an accomplishment when you're thinking about kind of the overarching themes of this season. Like with LAT, it's a lot different. Like if LAT added Nasty, I think that's also like a pretty interesting move. I don't know necessarily how it would work out. I don't know if Neum is long term the better person to be on that team, but it would also make sense from their perspective. I just don't think that will happen at all. I just think that would be crazy for LAT to do, even though it would make sense in theory. So yeah, I think, I don't know if Kismet will be off this roster. If he does, I would love for him to land immediately with a team that does need someone that could, like, they need a second SMG. Maybe there's a trade to be had. We don't see them, but Boston certainly could use Kismet to play next to Snoopy. I'd like to see the pairing between them, and let Kismet just kind of do what he does. Because they're going to have to make some, like, if you're going to trade Nasty, you might as well just completely overhaul that roster and see what you can do with Snoopy and maybe Kiz or whoever. But I think there's some potential moves. But yeah, Falcons, they still go 2-0. So like, this is as great of a week as you can get for the Riyadh Falcons, regardless of what might happen this coming week. Only other stuff is OpTic. I think we just have the two OpTic matches left. So they played Miami on Saturday, and then they played C9 today. We predicted them to win both matches. They are two-time defending world champions, and while they haven't looked spectacular at times, they are still OpTic, and they should win pretty much every match that you put in front of them in theory. But they did lose the opening map of the series against Miami. They lose Den Hardpoint 250 to 200. OpTic very rarely has a map where they're all negative, a respawn map, I should say, where they're all negative. That was one of these maps. Then they win a round 11 S&D. That's probably the least OpTic-like scenario, is to lose a hard point where you are all negative and then win a round 11 S&D. But they do so, and then they win Overload, they win hard point, and I think the Florida Curse is dead. We will revisit it when it is actually meaningful, like where it's going into champs, and we have Miami versus OpTic, where it's like a 2 versus 7 seed. And then we might be talking about it again. But what did you think of OpTic's first match of the weekend?
Yeah, I mean, definitely a pretty. If you told me OpTic was going to beat Miami 3-1, I would have said OpTic wins the 3 respawns and Miami wins the search. So in that regard, it was a little strange how the first 2 maps played out, but I think Metals dropping 39 kills. I mean, again, you think of somebody dropping 39 kills to lead the way for Miami in a hard point win over OpTic, you are most likely picking Rencor first, and then Super second, and then maybe Metals third. I mean, we just really haven't seen Trakes have like a 39-24 performance like Metals did here, so I think, Metals would be the third pick in that regard. But super strong performance out of him. Then they have this opportunity to go up 2-0 in the series. It's 4-4 in the S&D. They are in a 3v1 situation with OpTic having the bomb down, so they just got to defuse the bomb and kill Shotzi, who's last alive. And they let Shotzi get a pretty inexplicable 1v3 to go up 5-4. If Miami wins that round, potentially closes out the S&D, goes up 2-0 in the series, who knows what happens. But obviously, Shotzi, 14 kills in the S&D, pretty strong performance out of him. And then from that point on, it was like, super struggled in the overload at 10 and 24. That's something that's, he dropped 11 kills in the S&D, 10 in the overload, so he had less kills in the overload than he did in the search. That's just something you don't really expect to see from Super since we've seen him in the league. And then the last hard point, it was Shotzi and Hook who were leading the way, which isn't normally what we talk about with OpTic so far since they've added Mercules to the team, and we'll get to that with the C9 match. But yeah, I put in the notes like Miami after they win this map one, they really had me just thinking in terms of like going back to that that FAZE match in last week, and if Miami goes up 2-0 against OpTic, then I'm sitting here thinking like, is Miami legit? Are Miami like top dogs, like a top team, contenders for Major 2? Blah blah. But then OpTic, pretty much wiped that out. So I'm still sitting here a little confused about how Miami beat FaZe, and then OpTic just doing their thing here against Miami.
Yeah, I think this is pretty indicative of just the Miami experience and just general. To be honest, is they they show things where you're like, oh man, like that's really exciting. I hope they can keep that up, and then immediately they're like, oh okay, I maybe not, and then it just turns into a loss here. Like Miami, we've seen that plenty of times. They have really Miami this year has really only beaten the lower rung teams and FaZe. So like that FaZe match is like a pretty big anomaly for them to this point in the season, which is disappointing. But and I don't know if they're going to get there. It did take some time for Miami to kind of pick up pace, and they kind of just found a groove and just stuck to it last year. But yeah, it is disappointing for Miami not to be able to follow up. They played FaZe, I think, and then Paris, if I'm not mistaken, and last week, and then they play OpTic. So like you literally played maybe the three top teams, three of the top four. Like it's gonna get easier. You just have to win those matches for the Heretics.
Yep.
And then OpTic, obviously, like this is what I expect. Maybe not exactly how I expect it, but they do win this series. They are now, I believe, 3-0 to start the qualifiers, or I guess 2-0 at this point, and then we'll talk about their second match. I guess right now they played C9. I mean, that series went just about as expected. The overload was competitive, so there's something there for C9 to kind of take away, but otherwise this was like exactly like OpTic wins in dominant fashion. In the hard point, they win a decisive S&D, then they end up winning the overload. So this is like a great OpTic week. There are some kind of like points where they can kind of coach up the guys, I guess. That first map against Miami, the overload against C9, like there's going to be some points that you can pick out and say like, well, we just didn't do this very well. But otherwise, a pretty good week for OpTic. Anything on that C9 match?
Yeah, I forgot to mention it kind of as a joke for C9's first match, but C9 versus Falcons was, the $80,000 team against the $800,000 player in Celium. So Celium is reported salary is 10 times the entire reported salary for the C9 team. So I thought that was just, a funny thing. But salary jokes aside here, this was the Mercules show, and even the CDL Twitter put out a tweet after this match, like stat padding or whatever against Cloud9. I thought that was a little funny, but Merc drops 35 in the map 1, 13 and 4 in the map 3, and he had multiple 1v2s and a 1v3 clutch in this map, which obviously if those go the other way, Cloud9 wins the S&D 6-3 against OpTic versus OpTic winning 6-3. So I've talked about it multiple times this year. Like there have been a number of hard points, a number of search and destroys where I thought Merc just absolutely took over. I just remember one in particular on raid in the Major 1 qualifiers that I went on a little bit of a rant about. This is another example. I said it before we went live. Like the MVP pick for Merc is alive and well. This is his 6th series so far this year where he's had over a 1.3 KD according to Money Hill Stats on Twitter, and he had a 1.58 in this series. And it's against the Cloud9 team that's, you expect that from him, even though it's weird to think about, but the number of matches in the CDL that the Cloud9 players have played versus the number of matches Merc has played, that number isn't that this different because we're still in the first full year of Merc in the CDL. So that's kind of weird to think about. But um, end of the day, yeah, OpTic took care of business here. Outside of that S&D being the Merc show, and potentially, if his clutch nature didn't take over in that, it could have went another way. Then we're talking about Cloud9 winning 2 search and destroys this week because they beat Falcons in S&D. So let's just throw that out there for Cloud9's sake at least. Maybe that's something we got to look at with this young Cloud9 team going forward. Like maybe that's their avenue for a first potential series win is they catch some of these teams slipping in S&D and pull off a Neslo. But yeah, I mean, shout out MVP Merc for this one.
I mean, when does C9 play Boston? That's what I'm looking for. Like, whenever that happens, like that's the match of the week. They should put that at the very end of the week schedule. But yeah, OpTic, they go 2-0 this week. C9, I think they won a map this week, so that's a positive. Yep. We take those. But otherwise, about what you would expect of the second best team versus the maybe second worst team. Yeah, so I think that about does it. I will bring up the standings real quick, or I'll just talk about them. So LAT and OpTic are both tied for first place. They are 4-0 each. Technically, LAT has a better map count by 1 map. And then Paris is 3-0. And then you have FAZE, Falcons, G2. They are all 2-2, which is a very weird group of teams just in general. Then Miami, Vancouver, Carolina, Toronto, and Boston all have 1 win. Miami and Vancouver, they're 1-2 versus Carolina, Toronto, and Boston. They're all 1-3. And then at the bottom is C9 New York. They're 0-3, the only winless team left in these qualifiers. They're 1-9 a map count. But again, whenever they play the Boston Breach, that might change. The pick'em to this. What were you say?
Just from the standings perspective and going full circle here, the fact I know it's a 11 match qualifiers here, but the fact that FaZe are 2-2 and we have like these quote unquote questions or concerns, however you want to phrase it, and they're still technically in 4th place right now. That's a little interesting given the state of the league.
Yeah, I think it's very to be charitable, competitive. To be uncharitable, like unpredictable and like non-competitive. I don't know what the way to put that is. But yeah, I think it's been a weird season in general, just for everybody. We saw OpTic look like kind of world beaters to start the season. Then they looked really bad to end the qualifiers, and then they ended up going through the winners bracket to get to the grand finals. We've seen FaZe at times just look completely off, and other times look like they could beat anybody. So I think there's a lot to be excited about with the CDL, and I think it makes the matches maybe not better for the players, but it certainly makes them a little more exciting and unpredictable for the fans, which it kind of circles back to that original conversation we were having about the winners bracket advantage. Is it about being competitive and fair, or is it about being entertaining and kind of enticing for the fans? And I don't know if we'll ever get a real answer about that, but I think it's interesting that we ended where we started off pretty much. But yeah, that's the standings for this season, or for the qualifiers. Pick'em, you went 7-4 this week. I went 8-3. I think the only difference was that Falcons versus Carolina match. So Carolina costing you once again. But yeah, that puts me. No, we'll see. And maybe they play Boston at some point probably. So you might pick them then. But yeah, that gives me a 1-match lead in the pick'em so far this year. I am 54-28. You're 53-29, and Trimmer is still winless. I think we should be back. We'll be back at some point this week. It just kind of depends on how much feet of snow, how many feet of snow, I guess, Bink is covered by, and whether that knocks his power out for the next 3 to 6 months. That is something that happens from time to time, where Bink is without power or it's a little iffy. On that note, I apologize if there are any issues with today's podcast. I think it went relatively smoothly. This is we've gone on a little bit of streak, knock on wood, where we haven't had to like stop the podcast mid podcast and like restart again because like my power went out or your internet went out or whatever. But yeah, so I apologize if there are any technical difficulties, but otherwise, I think we should be back sometime this week to talk about whatever there is. Like maybe there will be 4 teams making roster changes, and maybe there'll be 0, and we'll be able to clown on Ben a little bit for having a really bad source. But yeah, that does it for us. Please like, subscribe, follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening and watching on. 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You can go and watch us live if you want on YouTube or Twitch, twitch.tv/Ego Chall Podcast. You can also follow and subscribe to Bink on Twitch, twitch.tv/jbink with 2Ks. Follow us on Twitter at jbink with 2Ks, at Preston Byers, and the podcasters at Ego Chall Podcast. And yeah, we'll be back at some point this week. That does it for me. Bink, take it away.
Yep, short and sweet for me because I got to go shovel. Thank you guys, as always, for all the support. Hopefully everyone stays safe with the snowstorm on the East Coast and whatnot. And like Preston said, we'll be back at some point this week as long as my power is cooperating and whatnot. So yeah, thank you guys, as always, and remember to send the chow.